His grandson was working on a Cold War project. "Grandpa, were you in the military during that time?" he asked. Frank said quietly, "Yes, I was in Berlin." It was the first time he'd given details. Tommy was 16 years old and had left his history assignment until the last day. His teacher had assigned the Cold War topic. "Grandpa," he said to Frank, "were you in the military during that time?" Frank stopped. In his 73 years of life, no one had ever asked this question so directly. His wife Mary had never been curious about the details, just saying, "Those were difficult times," and moving on. But now his grandson was looking at him with curious eyes. Frank took a deep breath. "Yes, Tommy," he said quietly. "I was in Berlin." Tommy's eyes widened. "During the Berlin Wall time?" Frank nodded. "I was stationed at Checkpoint Charlie, 1961. It was the first time he'd given this much detail, and the admiration on Tommy's face showed that it was time for Frank to tell the story he'd kept hidden for over 50 years. Welcome to The Last Stand. Do you also have someone in your family who tells stories about the Cold War era? Share what happened during this period in the comments. Frank Miller had been running a security company in Cleveland for 15 years. At 73 years old, average height, white-haired, always neatly dressed, his clients knew him as reliable and quiet. Frank had a special habit. Every morning while drinking his coffee, he would follow international news. Especially developments in Europe caught his interest. But he never explained the reason to anyone. The only notable thing in Frank's house was the world map in the living room. A small pin was placed over the city of Berlin. When visitors asked, he would say, "Old memories," and give no further explanation. That Saturday morning, his grandson Tommy came over. He was a high school senior and was preparing a project about the Cold War. "Grandpa," Tommy said, "I'm researching online, but you lived through that era. Can you tell me the real facts?" Frank stopped. For years, no one had asked so directly. "What do you want to know about the Cold War?" He asked cautiously. "The Berlin Wall," Tommy said excitedly. "How was it built in 1961? Was anyone there who witnessed it?" Frank's heart started racing. "Were you in the military during that time?" Tommy asked. After a long silence, Frank answered, "Yes, Tommy, I was in Berlin." Tommy's eyes widened. "Really? Were you there when the Berlin Wall was being built?" "I was stationed at Checkpoint Charlie," Frank said quietly, "in August 1961. Tommy jumped up excitedly. "This is incredible. Will you tell me everything?" Frank took a deep breath. After over 50 years, he was going to talk about those days for the first time. "In the summer of 1961, I was 21 years old." Frank began. "I was serving in the Army Military Police. I was sent to Berlin in June. At that time, Berlin was a divided city. West Berlin was like a small island in the middle of East Germany. But people could still move freely between sectors." Tommy listened carefully. "Checkpoint Charlie was the main crossing point between the American and Soviet sectors. I was doing identity checks there. Hundreds of people crossed every day. On the morning of August 13, 1961, everything changed. When I came to my shift at 6 a.m., I saw East German forces starting to put up barbed wire." Frank's voice began to tremble. Families were being separated. Mothers were trying to reach their children. Fathers couldn't return home from work. That day, more than 200 people escaped to West Berlin at the last minute. One of the most painful moments was the story of a young girl. Greta, 19 years old, a nursing student. She lived in East Berlin but worked in West Berlin. She had come to work that morning but couldn't return home in the evening. Her family was trapped on the east side. Greta was crying beside the barbed wire. Tommy listened quietly. "I tried to help her. She spoke English. 'Please,' she said, 'I need to see my mother.' But there was nothing I could do. As days passed, the barbed wire turned into a concrete wall. People could now only cross at Checkpoint Charlie, and only for very limited reasons. One of the most tense moments was in October 1961. American and Soviet tanks faced each other at Checkpoint Charlie. We waited for 16 hours. We all thought World War III was about to start. Frank rubbed his hands together. I was standing at the checkpoint. Soviet tanks 50 meters ahead, American tanks behind me. Only a white line in between. and I was standing on that line. My commander, Sergeant Rodriguez, told me, "Miller, tonight you're witnessing history, or it's the last night of history." I can still hear the sound of tank engines, Tommy. I can still feel the cold of that night. Fortunately, after 17 hours, the tanks withdrew. Kennedy and Khrushchev reached an agreement, but the tension continued. I served at Checkpoint Charlie for 2 years. I saw thousands of stories, people trying to escape, family reunions, separations. The most unforgettable incident was an elderly man named Conrad, 70 years old, living in East Berlin. His daughter lived on the west side. He came to the checkpoint every week. He tried to get permission to visit his daughter. Most of the time he was refused, but he never gave up. 6 months later, I learned that Conrad had cancer. His last wish was to see his daughter. I appealed to East German authorities. Finally, he got a 2-hour permit, watching Conrad reunite with his daughter. It was one of the most emotional moments of my life. Tommy's eyes filled with tears. I left Berlin in 1963, but those days never left me. When I returned home, no one was curious about this story. The Cold War seemed distant to people. In 1989, when the Berlin Wall fell, I watched it on television. I cried, Tommy. I cried for those people. For Conrad, for Greta. "Why did you never tell this story, Grandpa?" Tommy asked. Because no one wanted to know the real story. They only knew the historical events. But I had seen the people. The pain, the hope, the fear. And besides, Frank smiled, I was just doing my job. I didn't feel like I had done anything special. Tommy stood up. "Grandpa, you're an important part of history. This story should be told. Can I give a presentation at school?" Tommy asked excitedly. Frank thought about it. "Yes, Tommy. But remember this story isn't just mine. It's the story of thousands of people who were there in those days." Tommy told Frank's story in his project. The teacher was very impressed and invited Frank to the school. After over 50 years, Frank shared those days with others for the first time. The students in the classroom were mesmerized. The Cold War wasn't just politics, Frank told the students. It was human stories, families, hopes, fears. After the presentation, a student asked, "Mr. Miller, did you ever see Conrad again?" Frank smiled. "No, but I hope he had happy moments with his daughter." That day, the school principal came to Frank. "Mr. Miller, we'd like to invite you as a speaker at the city's Veterans Day ceremony." Frank was surprised. "I just did my job." "No, sir," said the principal. "You witnessed history. And this story must be kept alive." On Veterans Day, Frank spoke publicly for the first time. He told his Checkpoint Charlie stories. The audience gave him a standing ovation. After the ceremony, an elderly woman approached him. "Mr. Masterbly." "Miller," she said, "my father was also in Berlin, but he never talked about it. Your story helped me understand his silence." Another man approached. "Sir, I'm German. I came to America in 1965. Thanks to people like you, I was able to come freely." That day, Frank realized his story didn't belong only to him. He was a representative of all the pain and hope experienced in that era. Tommy's project became news in the local newspaper. It was published with the headline, "Local Security Guard's Cold War Secret." Old friends who read the article started calling Frank. "Frank, were you in Berlin? I was there too." Robert Chen, his old army buddy, called. "Frank, we found each other after 60 years. I was also at Checkpoint Charlie, but on a different shift." The two old friends met. They shared their memories. Robert had also never given details to his family. "Why were we silent?" Robert asked. "Because no one was really curious," Frank replied. "And maybe those memories were too heavy. But now it was different." Tommy's curiosity had opened Frank's door. Frank now joined the Cold War Veterans Group. They shared their stories at monthly meetings. "Did you ever forget Conrad?" a veteran asked. "Never," Frank said. "I never forgot his hope. Maybe that's why I stayed silent for so long. I was honoring that hope." When Tommy learned his project grade, he had received an A+. But for Frank, the real reward was something else. "Grandpa," Tommy said, "you're my hero. Not just because of military stories, but because of human stories." Frank hugged Tommy. "You gave me a gift, Tommy. You gave me back my voice." That evening, Frank and Mary talked for a long time. For the first time in their 50-year marriage, he shared the details of those days. "Why did I never ask?" Mary wondered. "Because you didn't need to. You accepted me as I was," Frank said. Frank's security company clients began looking at him with new respect. They introduced him as a Cold War veteran. But Frank no longer rejected this title, because he had understood the importance of those days. "Tommy," he said to his grandson one day, "you taught me an important lesson. The past exists not to be buried, but to be shared, and the stories of people like Conrad should not be silenced. They are the real heroes of history." Frank now regularly visits schools, sharing his Cold War experiences. He ends every speech with the same words. "In history books you read numbers, but I'm telling you about people, because history is the story of people." If these powerful stories appeal to you too, don't forget to subscribe to the Last Stand channel. We continue to bring you more hero stories every day. Frank Miller still operates his security company in Cleveland today, but he's no longer just a businessman. As a living witness of the Cold War, he has taken on the duty of preserving history, and every Veterans Day he remembers those difficult days at Checkpoint Charlie. For Conrad, for Greta, and for thousands of people whose names he never even knew, witnessing history is a privilege, Frank says, but keeping that history alive is a responsibility.